All right, folks, we're going to get started today. Like I said, we're still waiting for one of our folks from the West Coast to join us, but we can get started, and hopefully Peter will join us. If not, we'll figure it all out. We've been running this webinar series this is our second one, and our goal here is to sort of push out to our small business and mid-sized organizations, all the challenges of cyber compliance and defense. Most of the time, those are talked about separately, compliance, and then the defense side of things, like how do you defend your network and make sure nobody's actually getting in. And so what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about those challenges, how we've come to really automate both sides of the defense and the compliance side so that small businesses can easily and affordably get into making sure they're compliant at NIST levels, CMMC, high trust, whatever that compliance level is, but also at the same time be defended. So with that, I will sort of get the agenda here. So I think I just did that. And so I want to introduce the panelists. So I'm going to go around and maybe just give a real brief introduction. So why don't you go ahead, Rob? You're muted, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that. My name is Rob Cooley. I run a small consulting business called Simlytics.cloud, and we focus on simulation and analytics in the cloud. Most of my customers are government DoD customers, so I have significant requirement for cybersecurity compliance. I started out working with Dwayne as part of a consulting agreement, helping him build out the infrastructure, and when it became clear what he was doing with his business model, I approached him about also trying to help me with my cybersecurity compliance. I'd been through some of the initial steps, but really had a lot of holes in it. And so we'll talk a little bit later about how Dwayne helped me get from one level to the next level pretty rapidly.
Well, thank you, sir, and appreciate your service to the country as well. So why don't we move over to Jeremy? Why don't you just give a brief introduction and sort of, what your organization does and
sure.
Yeah.
Good morning. Afternoon. Good afternoon. So I'm with Mark Solutions. Basically, our organization is similar to Rob's. We are a government contractor. Our clients are all in the IC community. We provide software development, software engineers, and some cybersecurity folks to government entities. Our biggest push with this was to make sure that we were compliant for the things that are going to be required coming up here real soon. And so I've known Dwayne for quite some time and thought it was a good opportunity to jump on board. We are a small business, just under 20 people here. So looking forward to getting this done and sharing our experience thus far.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Mr. Monahan, why don't you give us a little brief background?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Monahan. I'm a principal solutions architect here at Digital Lantern. Primarily, I focus on our components of our distributed architecture, APIs, database design, and am a core contributor to our quantitative risk analysis system that we'll be talking about later.
Excellent. All right, so Peter's still not here, so let me just get started. When he gets someone, he's telling me he's just headed in this direction, so not physically, of course. All right, so real quickly, let's talk a little bit about what we set out to do as this organization. So what we realized, most of us here at Cyber Lantern, so let me first say Digital Lantern is the holding company for Cyber Lantern and Digital Lantern Federal. So Cyber Lantern is the company that Marcella Dennison runs for us, who does all the stuff that you're going to see today. But one of the things when we started this, we all came out of building big data platforms in cyber for DoD and the intelligence community. We pretty much realized that there was something still amiss in the industry at large when we saw these organizations, counties, states, infrastructure organizations, small businesses being ransomware on a regular basis. And so we realized very, very quickly that most of those folks are sort of the underserved. In other words, the big companies, the Splunks of the world. I'm not hating on anybody, by the way. Their markets are a little bit different, and they're not really focused on the one-person company, the 5 to 10 to 20 to 30-person company. And so what we realized we had to do is, in order to meet those challenges, is automate the heck out of everything, both on the compliance and defense side. And so we've taken all those lessons learned from our 15 years in the DoD, and we're very quickly able to build something that would both automate the defense and the compliance piece, so that an organization of one person could pay $500 a month for full 24/7 defense, as well as compliance readiness for CMMC, NIST, high trust. And so really that is our mission, and our sort of claim to fame right now is we are enterprise level security for sort of the cost of less than maybe your monthly gas bill nowadays. So where do we fit? There are a whole bunch of folks that do compliance at all different levels. And again, they're doing great jobs for their customer base. And there's a whole bunch of folks that also do the protect, which is like the SOC managed service kinds of stuff. And they're doing fine for their customers as well. But we realize that these things should not be separate. In order to be compliant, you need, outside of just policies and technology, you need to have actually a real defense. I always sort of associate this with sports, where you can practice and you can draw up all your plays. You can, practice every single day up to the game, and in the game you could still lose because you're just playing against teams that are better than you because maybe your practice wasn't exactly right. And so we're trying to make sure that between the practice and the game, meaning our defense, we can keep companies, one, compliant, and then keep them defended, and then keep this as a continuous process and not a one-time shot, meaning you get compliant once and then 3 years later you get compliant again. This to us is a continuous game, a journey, as we call it many times over. All right, so still waiting, but we're going to keep moving on. It's all good. I think you gave a good backdrop to some of the work you did with Peter. Let me just give you a real world scenario for us is we're also a government, our federal side is DoD contractor, and we've been through 2 assessments. Our first assessment was enlightening. It took a good 2 months to get through, and basically at the end of it, we just had a big list of things we had to buy. Didn't really have any context of why we had to buy them. Some of them we did, some of them we didn't. And so after we started moving through that process, we very quickly, and let me show you real quickly the evolution of that. So within, that initial assessment basically put us, because we didn't have the right technology, we didn't have the right policy. So if we're looking at this, we basically needed to be CMC level or CMMC level 3, but we didn't have a firewall, we didn't have endpoints, we really didn't have any configuration management, any patch management. So we really were absent a lot of this stuff because we're a small business and you really don't have the money to do that. So in that first assessment, we pretty much, if we're looking at the coverage, we're really bad, right, relative to a 3. And so our technology wasn't horrible because we were actually monitoring our information using Cyber Lantern, like we were already monitoring our stuff and doing continuous monitoring. So we got some credit there, but relatively speaking, we started -2 in these assessments, and we only got to -0.3. Now, come December, we added basically a firewall and CrowdStrike, and so our technology got a little bit better. You see, we got the new firewall. And now with that in CrowdStrike, we basically were able to add a little bit more practice. And this is the logic that's happening. We didn't answer one control question out of 150 some control questions. We haven't answered one of those directly at this point. And so when I look at the attachments at that point, we had a handbook, we had a high level remediation from the first, we had a POAM and an SSP from the first assessment that we did back in September of last year. Then we sort of got a little bit smarter. We decided to go through another assessment, and that assessment was a better experience for us, but it still took way too long relative to what we were expecting. Didn't have as many of the policy guidance things as we needed. We got good guidance, but it just wasn't maybe as much as we expected. And so we decided to automate this entire process. And so that sort of began our challenge of developing something that could take Peter's logic, that CISO logic, and automating it. So what you're seeing here is the evolution, the journey, if you will, we like saying that, where we started getting a lot better technology. You know, you can see where we started increasing our technology base, but probably more importantly, we started getting all of our policies straight. And so we wrote all these policies. We took them from different places, and we didn't know where is the best place to go for that. And so we took all of them and ran them through our scoring process. And basically, that again, without me answering one question, put us up a little bit better than 3. Since then, we've got an MDM, IBM system. We do active Nessus scans. We have safe breach scans. We're doing a lot more, and our policies got a lot better. So you can see these here. And the cool thing about all this is for a small business to be able to get through an assessment, again, we're getting you ready for compliance. We're not going to necessarily give you an audited kind of story here yet, but that's what it basically. So this is the journey. So here's our maturity or compliance journey, where we really were bad at the beginning, and all this stuff in here is all the technology and all the policy improvements we made, and we keep track of all that. So when the auditors come in, we give them basically an audit package, and that will sort of draw out all these changes that were made and the impact of that change. What you're seeing down here is our risk score, and that really goes to more of the protect piece, which is where we started. So this is actually one of our counties that we deal with. And so we are able to, based upon all the machines they have on their network, over 2,000, all the vulnerabilities that exist in their infrastructure, and all the active threats going against that network, we're able to do a whole bunch of stuff in the background to come up with basically a risk score for them. And so this is their maturity score. So this is their compliance score. And now this is the risk score. And so those are disconnected in this view, but they're actually really connected in the background of what we're doing. This is a whole machine learning driven engine. So you see all these negatives. These used to be actually alerts that showed up in our task over here. Our tasks are basically what our analysts should be looking at any given time. You see, we have EDC. This county doesn't have any at this moment in time, but they had a bunch of false positives, which turned out to be false positives over the last 6 months that we downvote. You can downvote these, upvote them. And basically the model in the background, the engine in the background slowly moves it out of the task area, and it's still an alert. It's still being triggered by a system. And so what we've basically been able to do is combine the protection side of this with the compliance. So automated compliance. So again, we didn't ask or answer one question in this compliance. So if I look over here, the overview, you're going to see all the controls that we have. So if you remember that spreadsheet I showed you at first, this is basically the equivalent to that spreadsheet, but all done automatically. And so we're showing you what you're susceptible to from social engineering, data exfiltration, credential theft. And so we're not just giving you a technology and policy and practice score. We're actually also, through a bunch of that other correlation, giving you sort of your susceptibility to these attack vectors. And so really our goal here is, as Sean said, is to give an assessor or an individual or a company an 80% path to where they can get started and understand their sort of the position in the cyber hygiene inside of their efforts. And then any assessor can come in and modify and do the typical assessment stuff where they ask you to find ask you the questions. And so all that stuff also gets saved into our engine in the background. And then what we do is our logic, the logic that we use to get the initial score, will then be compared to the logic, the end score from the assessor who actually went in and did, a more thorough assessment. And then we change our logic over time. So the more assessors that we have feeding this, the better our logic gets. And at some point, we're pretty much fully autonomous. And we're not there yet, but that's sort of where we are headed. So protect, compliance, all in the same environment, all connected and all continuous. So as you go down this journey, you'll basically, see your coverage, what kind of technology coverage you have, what kind of policy coverage you have. And you can basically from there decide where you still need work to be done. And we have this temporal notion that I showed you before. We have all the simulated threats that we do from safe breach. It tells us how many of those things were successful. So you usually would do safe breach, you do Nessus, you'd have your own separate POAMs from those, and then you would do X, Y, and Z. And so what we've tried to do is basically automatically from anything that you're doing, give you a POAM, a live POAM, something that will tell you exactly what you have to do. We basically have all the math in the background. Again, the scoring logic, this machine learning behind the scenes is saying, based upon your compliance level, what do you need to still get done? What is high? What is medium? Obviously, if they have vulnerabilities on their network that are already tagged as critical, that will come up in here as well. So that's the landscape. And so we offer this to small businesses because one, the small business don't always have the money, time, or energy to go through this process. And so with that, I want to open up to Jeremy to sort of discuss how Mark Solutions actually, work through this process with us.
Thanks, Dwayne. So I guess initially as a small company, hearing that we needed to look into compliance to continue doing work with the government, pretty soon that's going to be mandatory for certain levels of compliance for CMC. I reached out to Dwayne, asked him, who he was using, who he was working with, and ironically enough, he was creating and working on this and behind the scenes, and I didn't know about it. So that's cool. So I asked him if we could, start using some of the tools and software that he was using, and if it was feasible for us as a small company, knowing that, the biggest challenge for us oftentimes are three things I think of is time, finance, and manpower, right? Who's going to do it? How much time is it going to take, and how much money does it cost? And so Dwayne kind of, teed it up for me and gave me kind of a roadmap that I thought just made sense. And so that's the reason why I'm on here, because I thought if I could help someone else through this, it'd be pretty significant, not just for Dwayne, but for other companies who are thinking about doing this. So when we first started, I think we met probably in the later part of June talking about it. And then in July, we kind of had a meeting between him, myself, and a couple of people in our office and went through our IT structure as is, or as we thought it was. And Dwayne kind of went through some things and said, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? I guess you're scrolling through that. It seemed like it was about a good 30 or 40 questions of policies, procedures, things you have in place, firewalls, at what level of O365 do you guys have? What are you using? And kind of how are you handling your data, right? And so at that time, we realized then that, what we thought was good was, average and good probably for someone's home system, but not for a business that was doing government contracting, if you would. And so that score kind of was around the 0 point something really bad. What is that? 3? I didn't know you were going to show that, Dwayne. That's pretty bad. So 0.3.
Just for the record, most small businesses start with a worse score than that, and it's not to shame people. It really isn't, because we can we know how to get you above it. So don't, I know we had to talk you off the ledge because you guys are like, wait.
Yeah. No, so and I think that's a good segue. So shortly after that, probably within the next 2 weeks, it was kind of that roadmap that was given to us to say, hey, here's where you need to go, and here's some things you need to look at. So we contacted the folks at CrowdStrike and looked at getting some CrowdStrike implementation into our office. We updated our O365, and there were some things we just didn't even have turned on, right? There were some policies and things that we had that they offered to us, and some stuff that they had that we weren't even utilizing that was a part of our package. So that was cool. And thus we kind of built an SOP and updated some of our existing policies. And, the weird thing was even talking with folks in HR about our onboarding and offboarding. I mean, that was the most critical piece, because a lot of our contractors are accessing our data from their cell phones or personal laptops. And so just talking through that, what does that look like? And when a person comes onto the contract and is working for us and accessing data to the time they leave, and what happens with that data? Do they maintain it on their device? And if so, what does that look like? So those are big points for us. And then most recently, in the last week or so, Dwayne and I met again. And that's kind of when we just kind of ingested all of our stuff, and we're actually in the middle of implementing our CrowdStrike probably in this week. We've ordered it, and so we'll have all that done. But it kind of raised our score to the part where we thought, hey, we feel like we're in a good position now for, you know, talking to people here soon about an assessment. You know, we went from that negative and that 0.30 to roughly a 2, I think it is 2.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. There you go, 2.3. So that kind of helps. And then Dwayne kind of forecast with this platform here that I actually have access to as well, but Dwayne is showing my view. You can go in and kind of toggle with it a little bit and say, if I do this and I spend some time and effort and ingest some stuff and update some policies, I can raise my score, right? So if I go from a professional level to an enterprise level, what does that look like? And what do I need to do that with? And so the reach back has been good. I can say that, you know, the folks over there, Dwayne, that you guys have are doing a really good job in terms of responsiveness and timeliness. But for me, it was, you know, definitely cost effective. I handled most of it myself. I'd say probably 90% of it. We had another person in our office kind of update the other 10% or so. And so from a time standpoint, from the initial conversation with you up until now, I think we're, you know, 30 days, roughly around that time frame, to where I feel comfortable enough to say, or, you know, we're good. We're still going to keep going, but we're good enough now to at least have a conversation, right? So I think that this works, you know, on many levels. I can imagine, you know, if a prime was to contact me and ask me if we're compliant, if we're ready for an assessment and what's our level based on them trying to go after work, I can speak educated enough to say that we're in a good position and print out a lot of this data that you've given me, these charts. I've taken some screenshots and kind of relayed that to at least one of our primes already and showed them what I was doing. So that was very helpful.
Awesome. Can you just talk a little bit about the policy piece of this? Because this by far for small businesses is the most intimidating. Like, this is a lot of policies. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to get all these done and scored?
Yeah. So, you know, there was a lot of things that you know, reaching out to you guys and asking for best practices, right? Does anyone have a template? Does anyone have something that they're already doing? And can we implement that? And if you have something like that, what does that look like so that I can update my system based on that, right? So I wasn't trying to recreate the wheel here if there was already things that were there. And so you guys kind of aided with a lot of that, you know, here's a lot of the policies as they are. And if they're applicable to you and you're doing them, great. If you're not, here's some things you can start doing. So we took a lot of those and kind of formed them into our own, and then uploaded those to the site, and then that kind of took us to where we are now, which was, you know, a big step for us, sending all that data over to you guys, and you guys ingested that into this, you know, dashboard here.
Yeah, and that's awesome. One of the things that we at least gave to you know, all of our customers after they initially do this is this POAM thing. This is really where we're going to start helping customers. We're not trying to ding them on this negative thing. We're trying to guide them and tell them where their money is going to be best spent, right, and their time. So if you're going to spend your time on a policy, spend it on SOP, because it's going to give you the biggest weight across the board. Firewalls, you know, one of those things. Continuous monitoring is one of those things. And so there's a lot of stuff here, but we're going to guide you down that path of the things that you need, and then the things that are, you know, generally what their budgetary impact would be. And so we've worked with MEP organizations within at least the state of Maryland. And so Jeremy and his folks can get this entire service paid for under MEP from their mitigation, from their assessment and mitigation side. So it costs them actually nothing to have 24/7, not only defense, but this ongoing compliance scenario. So that's a very valuable piece for people to know. Most states have a MEP organization, and they have grants from Congress to actually help small businesses fund their cyber compliance and defense.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, thank you for that, Jeremy. And so with that, we'll go to another. Hey, Peter, I saw that you joined. We'll jump back to you after this, and appreciate you getting on. So Rob, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about your plight? You're just a one person, even though you're an amazing person, you're a one person company, and that's a whole different model for a lot of folks.
Yeah, thanks, Dwayne, and really thanks, Jeremy, for sharing your story while your company's, maybe 20 times bigger than mine because I'm a one person. We have a lot of the same concerns. We fall under the same regulations. And so I'll kind of start before I get into, my assessment with Dwayne, kind of where I was. And so when I met Dwayne, I was doing some consulting work for him, helping him build email and alert infrastructure for his own internal cybersecurity and building out some of this platform. And right about that same time, I was coming on a new contract with a prime. And so I had done, the CyberNIST certification and been through the checklist. But the big weakness is I did it all myself. And so while I do run a IT consulting work and systems engineering and like to think I can figure things out, I'm not trained in cybersecurity, and many of the things that I was coming across, I came across for the first time. And so I went through it. I did my self-assessment. I reported compliance back to my prime. I was, felt like I was diligent and honest and all of that. And I actually felt like I was in a pretty good place. But in that process, I recognized that the duty model had changed. And so, we had, penetration testing, external assessments, CMMC level 3 for CUI. These were all, kind of in addition to what was their previous policy of self-assessment compliance. And, I knew that there were some weaknesses. And so that's where I was when I first met, when I first approached Dwayne and said, well, in addition to this consulting work, I'd like to secure my own infrastructure, which, I run out of my home office. And so that was my start point, similar to Jeremy, where, we'd done some stuff, but we were pretty sure it wasn't, ready for the new paradigm, the new model, and quite honestly, the evolving threat. So much like Jeremy, I sat down with Dwayne and we did the rapid tech assessment, where, it was under 30 minutes. We got through the questionnaire and, got a decent technology score. I think, compared to some other small businesses, I was in good shape, and that was because of the previous work that I had done. And so, I had reason to believe we were going down the right path, but, huge weakness in terms of policy. So I had, a fairly short SOP. It was, probably fine for a one-person business, but there are a lot of holes in the SOP that, were in some cases were things I just hadn't, started to deal with yet. And then the other huge problem is this continuous monitoring and updating. So some of the things that I had done in a fairly recent update to my cybersecurity technology were already outdated, and I wasn't, even though I had log monitoring, unless, I didn't have the time to go review all those logs and, check every day to see if anything funny was going on. And so I didn't have this sort of continuous monitoring, and also needed a firewall, device management, and these sort of vulnerability assessments. And that's when the folks at CyberLantern, Dwayne's crew, was able to get me on board with CrowdStrike, with device management, with Nessus, and also monitoring my Office 365, and in the process of trying to get a firewall and push that data in as well. And so on the technology side, my score increased rapidly just by essentially subscribing to the technology services offered by CyberLantern, and now they're monitoring. And then the next challenge I had was policy, and much like Jeremy, you read a government publication for what you're required to do, but how do you translate that into an SOP that's going to withstand an audit? And similar to Jeremy, Dwayne shared some of the templates they had, I had to, review those and adapt them to what's appropriate for a one-person business and match my infrastructure. And then when an SOP said I was doing something, I had to see if I was actually doing it. So it took a while to get through some of that, but then we, uploaded the policies, and I didn't try to do everything on that. It was kind of the first run through, but we got to a pretty decent score by uploading the policies, and you can kind of see the evolution there of getting to a decent number. And then as an anecdote, so I had already subscribed to the technology pieces, had CrowdStrike running on my machine, and I was doing some web research to figure out what kind of firewall to get and what the capabilities were. And sure enough, Google offered me a site. I clicked on it, and didn't really think much of it. I just did, the site started offering me all kinds of things to download and whatnot. I said, well, we're not going to do that. And I, didn't think much of it. And, within 24 hours, they contacted me and said, hey, we got all these alerts on your system. And when we did the time correlation, it was, right after I run that search on my browser. And it was, a malicious website that was documented on a suspicious DNS search. And it was continuing to try and hit another site that, wasn't something that I wanted to connect to. And so not only did I get alert, but we ran a scan, and, I didn't click on anything, but didn't have any malicious activity. So, that's the part that I didn't have and I couldn't have without having, somebody else do this continuous monitoring. And then the last piece I'll get at is just the time savings. The first time that I did this compliance, it took me a good 2 weeks full time. So 80 hours that I'm not, generating business. The next time I did it, it was a little less than a week, but, it was to update for a new prime contractor, so there's another 30 or so hours that I'm not generating business. And I think this next phase with Dwayne, it's taking significantly less time, probably a little over a day of total work time. And most of that was me kind of reviewing and understanding the SOPs so that I could make sure I could implement them, and understanding, where in Dwayne's services they were providing that for me. And I suspect as we go forward, each of these reviews will get shorter and shorter on my time, and I'll be able to use that time to generate business. And I also, like Jeremy, I can talk to my primes and say, yeah, I've got some pros looking at my cybersecurity, and they're looking at it all the time, and you don't have to worry about me. We're good to go.
Excellent. Rob, I appreciate that, sir. And so I just want to touch, because we talked about both Rob and also Jeremy uploading policies that we had given them, but there's many cases where organizations have their own policies. And so what we've done is built out this model so that when organizations have their own policies and they upload their policies, you can see all these scores from one of our counties. So these are all their policies against the gold standard that's in our backend piece. But the really cool thing about this is we'll map whatever policies you have. So whatever documents you have, we're going to map them to whatever policy it has the highest score on, or it best matches to. So you can just dump all these documents into this engine, and it will basically give you coverage in any of the policies that are required, and also tell you when there's not a policy or that you have no coverage. And so that coverage story, again, can be viewed very easily without having to read much anything right here. And so this whole logic, this whole way of viewing things, the ability to say, okay, technology wise, this county has us monitoring all their stuff. They're a big, decent sized county, so they have the right firewalls, they have all the right stuff. But their policies, are still in a little bit, in a need of help. And so they know now that these are the things they need to work on. But because they're being monitored 24/7, because they have the right mindset, and because we have a proven track record that they block things when we send it to them, their vulnerabilities get fixed fairly quickly, all those things that aren't part of any assessment, but it's a continuation of us monitoring all their data. And so this whole view and the way that we're doing this, that's the CISO logic, and that was all derived from Peter Liebert, who was the ex-CISO of California. So Peter, maybe now that people have seen some of the implementation of that initial spreadsheet that you had, maybe just talk through whatever you think might be important for the group to hear. I'm going to end with one last thing. Is so as we're doing this for the small business and mid-sized organizations, we really, when we initially did this, our plight, I guess, was we've been protecting the DoD. Our group has had the experience of protecting at the various high levels of government, and those aren't the ones usually, minus SolarWinds and others, they're not the ones usually getting infiltrated. It's always the small to mid-sized organizations, whether they're counties, municipalities, universities, water plants, water treatment plants, all those things. And so we realize, we know because of working in that space that these are considered soft targets. And so we really wanted to basically look at not only how to make this a usable, very friendly and affordable thing for small to mid-sized organizations, but then to give organizations that have supply chains the ability to allow their organization to subscribe, or their supply chain to subscribe to this platform. Again, relatively inexpensive based upon your organizational size. Once you've done everything that everybody talked about today, so for instance, Rob and Jeremy both are part of, say, CACI or Mantech supply chain. What we expect, and this has just been released, is that as we, as organizations, us as one, start managing our risk and our compliance, it will roll up to those prime contractors, and they will have a view just like this of their entire supply chain. So each one of these being part of your supply chain, if your organization that does, and most people do have a supply chain, even we have a supply chain, like we have to buy firewalls and we have to do this. We're not going to obviously have Cisco tell them they have to join the system, but for all the small, mid-sized supply chain organizations who are part of this supply chain network, they'll be able to share, just like Dun & Bradstreet, they'll be able to share their scores, their risk scores and their compliance scores to insurance companies, to prime contractors, to anyone that is asking them to fill out the 4-page cyber questionnaire as if filling it out makes you compliant. And so really this is where we're headed with this. Make it easy and understandable for small business, small, mid-sized organizations. There's a lot of technology behind everything you've seen today. And so our goal is not to sort of show you the architecture and show you all the pieces of this massive scoring, distributed scoring model that we have. It's to show you how easy and how, like, within a sort of credit card kind of view, credit card app kind of view, see your risk, see your coverage instantly, see your vulnerability, see what's going on, and be able to attack, or not attack, that's the wrong word, but be able to actually address those as rapidly as possible. Because we do this for all of our organizations, they rarely have to log into this. This is what we do for them. And so we're constantly monitoring. We have a whole back-end system for hunt and malware analysis and stuff like that. But again, we don't want our customers necessarily to have to see all that behind that sausage making. They basically can come here and see that they're in pretty good shape today. They can see the risk score is pretty good. Most likely the risk score is probably a little bit higher than it should be because of the vulnerabilities on critical assets in the organization. So you see, like, this asset's considered high because of its place or its role in the organization. And to Peter's point, just because it got vulnerabilities on it doesn't necessarily mean it's susceptible. And so then we look at all the threats. And if there's a threat hitting a critical box that has a vulnerability, and this is where safe breach simulation can help, we can shore that up. This is where all these things get quantified in this risk score. And then obviously your risk score has some notion of impact to the practice of your maturity, because if your risk score is down and you're patching your vulnerabilities and you're blocking things on your firewall when detected, then your maturity score will go up. If these vulnerabilities stay here for 5 days, 4 days, or we know that you're not responding to our recommendations to block, that will ding their maturity score. And so again, back to the continuation, the continuous notion of this, we're not trying to shame people into anything. We're trying to help them get there. And once they're there, keep them there or get them better. So that's sort of, I know we went over by 4 minutes, but I apologize for that. I'll edit this so that Peter, you'll be first in the final analysis, and that will give context.
Come in late, still get first. All right. No,
There you go. But I really do appreciate everyone telling their stories, because really for us, it's about, look, everyone's going to wait until they're told to be compliant. We know that, right? It's just human nature. If we can get to people now and show them that this is not that difficult, that we can help you get there, and we can get you to where you need to be, then you're not going to be rushing around at the last minute. Because what's going to happen is someone's going to tell you you need to be compliant in 6 months, and everyone else is going to go to get compliant. And guess what's not going to be there? Assessors. Assessors are going to be tapped out. Auditors are going to be tapped out. So the sooner you can get into this is like keeping your hygiene, like your physical hygiene, in order, so that you don't, get sort of crazy there, or your medical, eating right and all those other kinds of things everybody tells you to do to stay healthy. All we're saying is protect yourself, meaning use our, we're not even saying ours, use somebody to help monitor your infrastructure, regardless how small it is, and then go through this compliance mechanism in order to understand and be ready for what we call checkbox bingo of compliance. Is, do you have this? Are you this? What's the impact? We've quantified that, and we're going to be able to show any auditor the scoring algorithms behind the scenes, how all these scores are generated, how they're weighted, and how they've evolved over time based upon assessors and individuals doing assessments and self-assessments. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week.